Welcome to Green Building Matters, the original and most popular podcast focused on the green building movement. Your host is Charlie Cicchetti, one of the most credentialed experts in the green building industry and one of the few to be honored as a lead fellow. Each week, Charlie welcomes a green building professional from around the globe to share their war stories, career advice, and unique insight into how sustainability is shaping the built environment. So settle in, grab a fresh cup of coffee, and get ready to find out why green building matters.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the next episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. Once a week, I get to interview a green building professional somewhere in the world. And every now and again, I like to sprinkle in some of my rock star colleagues. And that's what I've got today. I've got Monte Hilleman with us here, and he's actually in the Twin Cities up in Minnesota. He's been there a long time. He'll talk about that. And this is a great story because he actually used to be one of our VIP clients. And next thing you know, we get to work together now. So that's going to be a fun story to tell. Monte, how you doing today, man?
Wonderful, Charlie. Happy Friday to you.
Happy Friday, man. I always like to ask my podcast guests, give us that origin story. So take us back. Where'd you grow up and where'd you go to school?
Grew up in Minnesota. First in my family to be born in Minnesota instead of Iowa. So there's a pretty big delta there. Grew up in the suburbs of Minneapolis. Went to the University of Minnesota and was in the School of Urban Studies, focusing on urban ecology and infrastructure.
I know that's kind of what you ended up doing, but not everybody gets a degree in what they might end up doing. So how the heck did you pick that degree? And was it maybe like a program that was new? Like, tell me about how you even picked that degree.
It really started with a class. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I took a couple years off of school to do some fun stuff, which I think we'll get to later. But when I got back to school and got serious, I took a class called American Everyday Life. And I figured I'm an American. I have an everyday life. I can pass this course, right? But it was kind of pop culture-y all over the map. But we had a session on the burying of nuclear waste at Yucca Mountain on indigenous land, on tribal land. And that was my first exposure to the concept of environmental racism and the idea that in cities, which I was spending a lot of time in downtown Minneapolis and some pretty tough parts of the city at this period of my life, and was realizing that just like burying nuclear waste on indigenous land could have negative externalities, so could not having access to green space in an urban setting, or fresh water, fresh air, or sunlight, and so that really sent me down this path of brownfield redevelopment. And that was really the focus of my degree, the focus of my thesis, and what I went to go do early in my career.
Man, I love that. And that's a phrase we don't use enough, environmental racism. Look at what it did for you and this career. So yeah, I do usually ask you, did you have an aha moment? How'd you really get into green? And I know you know a lot about buildings and net zero and energy efficiency, but yeah, you've been doing a lot of horizontal work for a long time. So, did you have any kind of mentors along the way that also either opened a door for you or someone you kind of looked up to?
Yeah. One of my first mentors, I had 2 internships for my degree program, one of which was at the Phelan Corridor Initiative, the most non-existent, largest collaboration of folks focused on economic development and community development in the city of St. Paul in the 1990s. And I was the unpaid intern to the project director, a guy named Kurt Milberg. And Kurt, for about a decade, shepherded the Phelan Corridor Initiative along, which was all about cleaning up a contaminated old railroad corridor and providing transportation access to a forgotten part of the east side of St. Paul. So Kurt was definitely an early mentor and influence, taught me the ropes around local and state politics. More recently, say for the last 20 years, Rick Carter at LHB Architects has been a big green design sustainability mentor of mine and continues to be to this day as a client, as a partner, as a friend. Really some great wisdom I've received from him over the years, and we constantly challenge each other to try and do a little better.
Yeah, no, I know Rick through the Lead Fellow Network and more. Like you said, just great firm. Well, tell us about your region. Whenever I bring in someone that's not near Atlanta, Georgia, where I'm based, but Monte, I get to travel a little bit. But tell us about doing green and sustainability and even net zero in Minnesota. I mean, which parts of it are a little easier? Which parts of it are a little harder?
One of the easier parts are around the actual culture and peer network here in Minnesota. My second internship was at the Minnesota Office of Environmental Assistance. And so in the mid 90s, there was this huge network, the Minnesota Sustainable Communities Network, of people that were trying to figure out industrial ecology, eco-industrial development. They were trying to figure out materials circularity, all the stuff we're still wrestling with 25 years later. There's been a culture and an environment and peers in Minnesota to help move that ball forward on all of those fronts. Minnesota's got a long track record of being a pioneer in a lot of environmental policy areas. And those folks were coming out of the Office of Environmental Assistance. So that makes it easier here from a practical standpoint, from a technical standpoint. The weather is tough. We came out of, February 2nd. It is 41 degrees right now. It was 53 degrees yesterday. And about 2 weeks ago, it was -10 with a 30 below wind chill.
Oh, no way.
How do you do that in the period of a month? How do our buildings, how does the built environment respond to those kind of temperature swings? It's kind of crazy.
You're absolutely right. And even during construction too, I'll never forget. I don't know if you know this, I worked for Opus. That was a very large real estate developer. And that's where I cut my teeth on LEED. And I went up for some training in Minnetonka there. And it was in January. And I was like, man, they're telling us, hey, we really don't pour concrete for about this many months. And the ground's frozen. And it was just eye-opening. But that was a great time for me. And that's where I first was introduced to LEED. And I know you know a lot of those folks too. So, you really stretch across the whole state, but it's good to hear that. And I would second that there's just, an openness to, hey, there's a better way here. So that's amazing. Well, let's look back a little more. So I like to ask, hey, what are some of your proudest accomplishments?
Well, I spent a decade while I was at the St. Paul Port Authority. I spent a decade in charge of redeveloping the former world headquarters of 3M. So 46 acres, 1.5 million square feet of functionally obsolete buildings, some environmental problems they left behind, which they agreed in our acquisition negotiation to fix. But, there were buildings sitting on top of the remains of a foundry from 100 years ago, before 3M was ever even there. So my job was to get the stuff that 3M didn't do. They helped get the stuff they did do. But we turned that into Beacon Bluff Business Center with a focus on job creation. It is on the east side of St. Paul, a historically disinvested community. And we started off with a goal to bring 1,000 jobs back to that site. We did. At one point, we had installed the largest rooftop solar array in the state of Minnesota. I think that's been beaten now. And I spearheaded an effort to develop the first net zero energy plaza in the country about a decade ago. I don't know if that's a thing, but I looked around at the time and couldn't find another one. So I called it a thing. So that was a decade. I just last year was wrapping up the planning for what would have been my next decade of work at the Port Authority, which is another big project, a 112-acre contaminated golf course called The Heights. And we developed net zero design criteria for all the buyers at The Heights, figured out how to do it. Currently, my fellow colleagues are out there showing buyers, developers how to do it now. Something I spent a lot of time on was the social equity and wealth creation strategies at The Heights. We took a 30-year-old model of what is really a community benefits agreement, and myself and my colleagues re-envisioned that for the modern social justice era. And so we worked a lot with stakeholders in the neighborhood, community service providers, et cetera, on really getting at some of the creators of local and neighborhood wealth creation. And that was really something I'm quite proud of, and some things that will survive the test of time, I think, long after I'm.
Yeah, man, that impact, it's very impressive. And I know that's what led you to some other programs we'll talk about next, LEED for Cities and Communities. But, even newer versions of LEED, as we approach LEED version 5, some of that you just have been doing for 18, 20 years, Monte, is just now coming back around. And so you really were early in that. And I just think that's amazing. As long as I've known you, it's like you really do care about that community, but not just that, just the people in the community. And man, let's set everybody up for success. And I've noticed that about you. And I think that's just amazing. So that kind of lends to LEED for Cities and Communities. Not everybody knows that program. That's how around when you and I first met several years ago. And thanks for hiring SIG to be one of the first to be able to do that kind of work with you a couple times over. But, for those listening, there's a LEED for Neighborhood Development program, Live, Work, Play Communities. Been out for a long time. That exam, by the way, I think is one of the hardest. I've passed all of them. LEED for Cities and Communities. I don't know, how would you define it? What attracted you to that program? And next thing you know is, you're one of the experts with that program that even has a category for quality of life, one of my favorite categories within LEED for Cities and Communities. So tell us about why did you go that direction?
Well, we were looking for a sustainability platform for the large site I mentioned, the 112-acre contaminated golf course, another 50-acre site I was consulting on across the river in Minneapolis. Really, at the same time, we were looking for sustainability platforms for these large site developments. We looked at LEED for campus. We looked at LEED for neighborhood development. We looked at eco districts. And then we started hearing about this new pilot program within USGBC called LEED for Cities and Communities. And the more we looked through it, especially as primarily a land developer, it really touches on all of the things you have to think about in preparing a large site for future vertical development, from green and open space to endangered species, stormwater, wastewater, roads, transit, recreation. I mean, you kind of have to look at everything holistic and very integrative approach, and something that really resonated with me. I appreciate the quality of life comment there, Charlie, that gets to some of the social equity components. I was lucky enough to be invited by U.S. Green Building Council to be on 2 different international work groups for LEED for Communities, one around equity and one around greenhouse gas emissions, 2 things that LEED for Communities really leans into, and was happy to provide some feedback on the equity components, since, as you mentioned, that have been a big chunk of the last couple of decades of my work, and really dove into the calculations on the greenhouse gas side. How would we make this site net zero? How would we define that within LEED for Communities? And LEED for Communities really gave us all a common set of definitions, a common set of metrics, and common language to talk about all of the sustainability stuff. So that's why I really appreciated it. I've been out there preaching LEED for Communities to anybody with a big site that'll listen. And it's a great way to align the sustainable design and intention of the horizontal with that of the forthcoming vertical.
Well said. For those listening, I'll put a link to LEED for Cities and Communities. Check it out. It's just an amazing program. Well, before we get to present day, one more thing. You're an excellent speaker. You get out and just, from stage, talk on all these important topics. You've got credentials, you volunteer. So tell us about that part of your career and how has that helped you, especially sharing that subject matter expertise. And then we'll talk about some of the work we're doing over here.
That gift of gab, if you will. I think a therapist at one point told me I had the gift of gab. I didn't think it was that particular setting, but it really is in my DNA. Very young age, I was a break dancer, and so I was in public, whether it be on the street corner in the suburbs or at the mall, the shopping center mall, the big regional mall had breakdance contests. This is like early 1980s. I'm talking. That progressed as a creative outlet into a passion for skateboarding. I was top 10 in the nation a couple of years in a row riding big vert ramps, like on the X Games. I don't think they were quite small back in the day, but they were pretty big. We were pretty far up there, but beat myself up way too much skateboarding. I had to retire at the ripe old age of, I think, 20, maybe 21, and then really turn that creative outlet and that passion for creativity into music production and DJing. So it's not hard to make the leap to someone who does a lot of public speaking, is relatively okay at it, and is always looking to connect with people in a sort of a outward fashion. I will say it's funny. We got to hear, because tonight is House Proud, house music event we still do here in Minneapolis. It's Friday of every month for 13 years now. And tonight is the night. So as soon as Charlie and I wrap up here, I gotta go stick speakers and plug some stuff in and make the magic happen.
That's what you do. And text me a picture, man. I can't wait to see that again, that layout. And, but it just helps. You're a cool cat, from skateboarding to this green building career, and now even doing some DJing and advanced music, and just having a good time, man. So, well, let's talk present day besides you and the DJing. When it comes to a newly created division within one of our green building companies, Climate Investment Solutions. Monte, what the heck is that? What's a day in the life of Monte today?
Well, the most exciting part is really being able, with the trust you, Charlie, and others at the company have put in me, to stand up a new department, new product and service offerings. I've been with Signal for 7+ months, 7-8 months?
Yeah, we rounded up called about a year. So
okay. But I've really been given the grace to ideate, to iterate, and really figure out a way, some of the best ways I can understand, and I think others, to stack, model, and monetize green finance. I spent time at the Port Authority on the board of governors of numerous joint ventures with private sector developers. So I got a crash course in commercial real estate financing as a practitioner, having to do it. And also the last 10 years of reviewing PACE financing, property assessed clean energy financing transactions. The Port Authority is the state of Minnesota's administrator for PACE, CPACE, commercial property assessed clean energy financing. And I had to review and approve on the internal credit committee, 300 plus transactions, about $500 million worth of investment. So taking those lessons learned, and now we have awesome tools like the Inflation Reduction Act. How do you stack that with PACE financing? These tools are being multiplied at the state and local government level with additional rebates and incentives. There are programs and dollars that haven't even been figured out how they're going to get to the street and get into projects yet. And so I think we really are at the tip of the spear with our Climate Investment Solutions Department of helping the commercial real estate marketplace understand these tools, because they're confusing. It's sustainable design and energy modeling mixed with tax accounting and tax law and the IRS. I mean, things you wouldn't naturally think go well together. So you got to wear 6 or 8 different hats to put the pieces together. And it's just, it's a challenge. And it's an awesome challenge every day to work through this stuff and help our clients see they can do better by doing green.
That's right. And I know you have these literal green pro formas, the real estate language. And, even me, I was a little ignorant to it. And I really thought there was just a little bit of money for energy savings around cost segregation or depreciation. But there's so many, like you said, layers and layers and layers. So, without getting into too much detail, and we know there's the Inflation Reduction Act, but just in general, if someone's listening, they might have a project they're trying to finance, because I think in general, right, you're in sales, Monte, I'm in sales. For the first time in a long time, we've got to kind of also help either save a lot of money and energy savings, or we've got to help find a way to pay for these green projects maybe than in the past, especially around like office buildings and certain building types. But where would you suggest someone start if they're like, oh, is there any green financing for my project?
One of the first places to start, 2 ideas. A, you really should figure out if each state has the ability to initiate these property assessed clean energy financing programs. Figure out if your state has a PACE program. There's a great site called PACE Nation. PACE Nation is a national lobbying and advocacy body for PACE financing. They've got a great tool. You can look at your state. You can see who's got the programs, if they have a program, et cetera. But also looking into the Inflation Reduction Act. And now, right about this time this year, is the first time people can be reviewing their projects. So a project could be an equipment swap. It could be a retrofit, a deep retrofit, or an entirely new development, new construction. All of them can qualify for a variety of benefits under the Inflation Reduction Act. So understanding what you did in 2023, and can you simply file a couple more sheets of paper with your tax return this year that get you back a boatload of money, either as a deduction or a tax credit. That's where I would start. It gets complicated from there, frankly, and that's why we exist and why I'm doing what I'm doing. But I can say generally, mixing these tools together, stacking these tools together allows you to have a more efficient capital stack, spend less on cost of capital. It means you can improve your financial returns. We look at internal rates of return. We look on valuation. We look at cash on cash, yield on cost, all the different metrics that people use to make these kinds of decisions, and really go down the rabbit hole to prove this up on an investment basis. And so this is the year people can start using these tools. Many of those that are listening probably did projects in 2023 that have some associated green financing, Inflation Reduction Act, or otherwise related incentive. They're going to leave money sitting on the table if they're not figuring it out. We're past the days of building brown buildings financed with 20, 30-year-old financial models. We really need to be focused on building these green buildings with all of the green tools that have been made available, and there's more than ever today.
So hopefully everyone here listening hears it's there. You got to try a little harder. There's a lot of different ways to do this, but go to some of those sites first. Start with PACE. That just makes sense. Well, Monte, anything else about kind of current day? Any other cool projects you like to work on? Or I know you love the net zero feasibility side of things. I mean, what else, you're working on today? And then we'll shift to the future.
Today, one of the things we're working on for clients is a net zero pro forma. Something I heard at a conference 3 years ago. Like I had never heard those three words together. And now we're building them for clients. And that's exciting because it's novel in the marketplace. Folks who are into this stuff and trying to figure it out haven't quite gotten there yet. And we can help them get that final way of tying the ends of the string together from a financial perspective. And so that's what's exciting me today is helping these clients with these net zero pro formas and really daylighting what otherwise is often a little too convoluted.
All right. There you go. You heard it. Well, I love asking green building professionals like you about the future. What are you kind of excited about, Monte? What's coming at us a little bit down the road that maybe you're reading up on or, you think's definitely coming our way?
Well, we've been talking internally. I think folks know in the marketplace that we're going to be spending a lot more time over the next few years, the near term, focusing on existing buildings. Been a bit of a slowdown in development and new construction. I think we're all feeling that across the marketplace. And, we still are adjusting to this new normal. I know we've been saying those words, new normal, for years now, it seems, and we have. But I can tell you, my wife just got notice yesterday. She works for a large financial banking institution in the country here, one of the largest. And they've been on 2 days in the office. And just yesterday, they were announced, you're back to 3 days, mandatory 3 days in the office. And so, at what point is the new normal? Yeah, you're 3 or 4 days in the office. And how different is 3 or 4 days in the office to 5 days in the office? We're going to recalibrate, right, to a new level set of what that means for our cities and our communities to be in an office physically that amount of time or some amount of time. And until we hit that equilibrium, there's going to be a lot of time, I think, chewing away at this existing building stock. I think the technology side is super exciting to me. I know, Charlie, through our associated green building companies, we do a lot in the IT space. There's a lot coming down the pipe on the construction side as well. Before I left the Port Authority, I delivered a new headquarters space for them where we were the first full office install of power over Ethernet, where some of the receptacles and all of the lighting is wired with Ethernet cable rather than full voltage, giving you micro control over everything. And Department of Energy is studying that space now to help figure out what are the other benefits, what are other financial and other benefits that come along with power over Ethernet. Studying things like phase change material, physics, changing the materials, the physical characteristics of our building materials in association with their environment. So I think there's a lot on the tech side. The market stuff, I think, is going to settle down and play out as we readjust to this new normal. The finance side, we're at the beginning of 10 years of a revolution in how we build and finance buildings in this country. And I don't think most of the market quite understands that this is so much money being infused in such a very particular way, so carefully guided to carbon emissions reductions, energy efficiency, assisting these projects get financed and get out of the ground or get retrofitted. It really is going to be a game changer for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, the adaptive reuse, let alone just anything in general with commercial real estate, the regional banks that hold most of those notes. And, we heard a horror story earlier this week with one of our big clients, $50 billion in assets, said that even their office buildings, not to scare people here, I think things are actually, turning around and there's lots of good work to do this year. But, they said that even their well-leased buildings where they're doing okay, some banks are trying to find a way to call their note. It's like, that's crazy. So anyways, but the future is bright. What else, Monty? You hit on IoT there. I mean, you're right. Now we're in the age of AI. I mean, there's just so much right in front of us.
Yeah, it really we're in a place where we can't rest on our laurels, do the math like we used to do the back of the envelope math. There's kind of a new math, right? And with AI, there's also a new IT. We're really starting some of these entire industries with a new set of ground rules, and exciting. It's a little freaky. It's a little challenging, but it's exciting.
Well said. That's a good quote there. All right, so let's get to know Monte a little more. At this point of our podcast, man, I'm having a blast. I'm learning a little more about you I didn't know. Just some rapid fire questions to kind of get to know you more. So what would you say is your specialty or gift?
It is got to be that gift of gab.
Did you always, most people, one of their biggest fears is public speaking. So, maybe it's heights or snakes, but public speaking. So did you have it as a kid? Were you on the debate team, or just, man, a little later in life, you had the confidence? It's like, we're going to go have fun. Like, when did it hit you?
Yeah, I think it was a little later in life. It was public performance aspect of both breakdancing and skateboarding and then DJing. Very used and very comfortable to performing in public, much like public speaking. And I had some great opportunities early in my career. 20 some years ago, almost 25 years ago, it was my first job. I think I was on the job for 6 months, and they sent me to California to speak at the California Integrated Waste Management Board. So I was doing national conferences 25 years ago, and it really hasn't stopped since. So definitely something in the DNA around public performance, and, just don't let me near a microphone. You won't get it back.
That's great, man. Oh, man. All right. So how about any good habits or routines, rituals that help you stay on point?
Does coffee and bourbon count?
Oh, well, for me, I think, I've kind of gotten into bourbon in the last year. So, yeah, of course, coffee, bourbon. What else you got?
As in terms of a routine, I'm a night owl, if you couldn't tell already. And so I do my best work at night, 10 p.m. to 1 or 2 in the morning. It's quiet. My toddler, my teenager are to bed. My wife's in bed. I've got the house to myself, and it's just quiet. There's a late evening, sense of serenity that really helps me focus when I need to do focus work, dive into a spreadsheet uninterrupted for even 45 minutes, an hour and a half. It's like just incredibly productive time for me. That and leveraging technology, everywhere. I grew up, my older brother in high school would take apart every toy I was given. He'd rip it. It was, of course, it was electronic most of the time. And he'd rip that crap apart and try and figure out how to put it back together. Looked up to him a lot. I still do. And, he went on to ask our parents for a ruby for Christmas one year so he could build a laser. And in high school, he was already building robots. And so I've always had this fascination with technology. She really helped instill that in me to this day. And so anything I can do to leverage technology across my life, I figure it worth the time to figure it out if it saves me a second on the back.
I have that approach too. You and I compare some technology tips, man. I love it. All right. Well, I'm a fan of the bucket list. Not everybody has a bucket list. That's okay. But, if you were to say 1 or 2 things on your bucket list, Monty, any adventure, travel, write a book, get back on a skateboard with Tony Hawk. I mean, what's left to do, man? What's on the bucket list?
I don't really have a bucket list. I hadn't really thought of this until we were having this conversation. As dumb as it sounds, I haven't really gone on a cool golf trip with my brother. That's something he and I really need to figure out. Going on a trip to Asia with my wife. We've never been. That would be amazing. It's interesting you mentioned write a book, because when I look back across these decades, which feel like other people's lives, when I remember what is going on with my life, I've kind of done all the crazy stuff you could think of. So anything on my bucket list is going to have to be pretty chill. But one of those things on my bucket list could be writing a book, even if it's just for myself, to document some of these crazy stories. Because you could imagine breakdancing, skateboarding, and DJing for the last 30 years of my life, or than that,
the book than the movie, man. I love it.
There's some pretty good stories buried in there, let me tell you.
Yeah, I bet. I'm sure Prince and others are involved. I can't wait to hear them, man. So over some bourbon. So what about travel, though? I mean, I can tell you've been all over the U.S. You want to go further? What's one spot you want to get to one day?
Well, my wife and I, we took our honeymoon in Barcelona and then went to the island of Mallorca. And that was just so beautiful and so relaxing. Would love to repeat that. I've done a bunch of Europe, but I could always do more Europe. And South America. I've never been to South America either. So a few different continents I would love to get to that we haven't done yet.
Good, man. Well, I'm trying to get out there more myself. We have a great partnership with a great company in Colombia. So we're starting to get into Latin America a little bit more there, thanks to our friends at Green Loop. We've got some friends in Mexico. So we'll get you down there. That'll be fun. Just a few more questions here, Monte. Books. It doesn't have to be about buildings or anything, but is there a book you'd recommend to our listeners?
Yeah. Recent books, not so much. I've got a toddler and a teenager, and they keep me running pretty hard. So I haven't had a lot of time for recreational reading. There is a book I keep coming back to, though. It's maybe hard to call it a book. It's called Be Here Now. It was written by Ram Dass, 1971. He's a yogi and a guru, and they call it the counterculture Bible. And so it is deep. It is weird. It's visual and illustrated. And yeah, if anyone's looking for something really off the beaten path, check out Be Here Now by Ram Dass. It's a trip. Literally, it's a trip.
Oh, man. All right. Well, we're going to put a link to it in the show notes. Everybody check it out. I trust your judgment there. It sounds like a wild one. We'll put those links in the show notes. Monte, a couple of things as we wind down. As you look back on your career, is there anything you wish you'd have known earlier? Any career advice you wish you'd have known earlier?
Yeah, and it actually relates to that, what'd you call it, superpower, specialty gift, that gift of gab. It can be a bit much, I've learned over the course of time. And one of my colleagues, great woman, she now runs the St. Paul Chamber of Commerce, B. Kyle. B was my colleague for years at the Port Authority, and she had written on her whiteboard above her desk. We were very close friends and advisors, if you will. Does it need to be said now? Does it need to be said by me? And those are just two burning questions. That there were many moments in my life I would have taken a breath and said, does anybody really need to hear this right now? Does anybody really need to hear this from me right now? So that's something I wish I would have learned earlier. If there was something I could share, something I did experience early in my career was having really broad-based exposure to any number of fields, disciplines within the sustainability green building movement. That time I spent with my mentor I mentioned earlier, was Kurt Milburn at the Failing Corridor Initiative. I met everyone from every organization I would work with or work for in the city of St. Paul for the next 20 years. And so, I knew who to go to if I wanted to talk about infrastructure or housing or jobs in private sector investment or labor, access to labor, workforce development, you name it. So, and that really showed me how the ecosystem worked, but it also helped me refine where I wanted to fit into that ecosystem. So, I think all too often with my teenager who's graduating this year, you're kind of hoping or pushing yourself or talking to your kids about what they're interested in and what do you want to go do. It's kind of really hard to figure out what you want to go do until you've seen what's out in the world. And so getting that broad-based exposure, either, travel and personal broad-based exposure or within a content area, within a topical area, figure out what that ecosystem looks like before you wed yourself too much to going down any particular path.
Ton of wisdom here, and that's just a great segue to build on is, all right, let's say someone's listening to this podcast. We actually have thousands of people that listen every single week, so I'm grateful to all of our listeners over 6 years. I know how to use the microphone a little bit here, Monte. It's taken me about 300 interviews, but I'm getting a little bit better here. So let's say someone's listening, man, they're just stoked to hear your story. And, it could be someone that's changing careers, a little bit like you did here, but you've been in green for a while, but maybe someone's just getting into green, or maybe they're a young professional that really knows, hey, this is where I want to be. I want to work in this mission-driven field. Any words of encouragement as we come to a close to someone that's jumping in right now?
Yeah. Figure out how you can pull the biggest lever. So in my world, and we talked about this a lot in my church, I'm got a very strong belief and faith group and a very social justice focused church home. And we talk a lot in our work on climate. How do we pull the biggest lever when it comes to climate? Because that's what that group is all into. If you're into affordable housing, great. What's the biggest lever you can pull to make some movement to push that rock up the hill on affordable housing or workforce development or wealth creation or social equity? What's the biggest lever? And put your shoulder and put your head into pushing and pulling on that biggest lever.
Man, you got me pumped up, and it's late in the day where I'm at. So, hey, everybody, reach out to Monte here. Connect with him on LinkedIn. If I know anything about him, not only does he have a big heart, but he meets our motto of our podcast, which I didn't even tell you, Monte. I just said, hey, Monte, I need you to get on this podcast. But that's because I knew you had a great story. The motto here of our podcast is teach everything you know. And I bet if someone listening said, hey, Monte, you got 5 minutes, I want to ask you a question, I bet he'd do that. So everybody connect with Monte. Monte, I'm having just a ton of fun working with you. You are essential to the success of the green building companies I've been working in for 15 years. So thanks for being with us. And I hope everybody listening really got some fun, just some wisdom today. So Monte, thanks so much, man.
Thank you, Charlie. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. At gbes.com, our mission is to advance the green building movement through best-in-class education and encouragement. Remember, you can go to gbes.com/podcast for any notes and links that we mentioned in today's episode. And you can actually see the other episodes that have already been recorded with our amazing guests. Please tell your friends about this podcast. Tell your colleagues. And if you really enjoyed it, leave a positive review on iTunes. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on next week's episode.